Welcome, everybody. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. Just to make sure you're in the right place, this will be a presentation. We're talking about assisted outpatient treatment. I'm here. My name is Betsy Johnson. I'm joined by my co-presenter, Randall Hagar.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. Welcome. Looks like we still have participants who are still kind of floating in. So looks like we've got 22 of you. Thank you. Welcome. Some of you may know me as a former NAMI California board member, first vice president and legislative chair for NAMI California during the days when AOT was just an idea and it wasn't a law.
I'll go ahead and just tell you a little bit about myself. I'm an implementation specialist for the Treatment Advocacy Center. I work with communities around the country to help them get AOT programs up and running. Prior to joining TAC about 5 years ago, I was the Associate Executive Director for NAMI Ohio. And while I was with NAMI, we worked on assisted outpatient treatment legislation. It took us 3 years to get it passed. Even though we had a lot of hurdles to jump, it ended up we passed it unanimously in both the House and Senate. So it's been in effect in Ohio for about 4 years now. And shortly after getting the law passed, we had a big celebration, and I thought, communities around the state are just going to jump at the opportunity to get to implement the new law, and discovered quickly that that was not the case at all, that getting it implemented was actually going to be the more difficult job. So it was about that time that I joined the Treatment Advocacy Center and been working not only with communities in Ohio, but around the country.
Yeah, a similar history here. The AOT statute in California was actually enacted in 2002. But it's taken all that time to get 20 out of the 58 counties to actually implement it. And I have some news about that a little bit later in the presentation, but I've been very active in doing that as the Director of Government Relations for the California Psychiatric Association, representing psychiatrists in California. So I'm also obviously a treatment advocacy board member, and a lot of really great folks, great programs, wonderful website. If you need a resource, check out TAC's website for information. They do have a page on Laura's Law, as assisted outpatient treatment is called here in California. So we might as well get started.
Okay. So we have you for about 45 minutes. We want to leave about 10 minutes at the end for Q&A. So we have a lot of material to cover, so I apologize. We'll probably be talking pretty quickly, at least I will. I'm going to share a little bit about the Treatment Advocacy Center and talk about treatment non-adherence. Turn it over to Randall, where he'll talk about Laura's Law here in California. And then I'll talk to you a little bit about give you some practical ideas of things you can do both as a family member and as It was funded about 20 years ago by Dr. E. Fuller Torrey. If you're not familiar with Dr. Torrey, he's written a book called Surviving Schizophrenia. I know I've had a lot of family members over the years who carry that book around with them and treat it like a Bible. It's really, I know, helped a lot of people understand schizophrenia. But the Treatment Advocacy Center focuses primarily on eliminating barriers for people with serious mental illness to get timely and effective treatment. When we use the term severe mental illness at the Treatment Advocacy Center, we're really talking about a group that's maybe a little bit narrower than the population that NAMI uses. But we're talking about those individuals primarily with schizophrenia or severe bipolar disorder. So roughly about 3% of the California's population, or 1.4 million adults. About half of these folks with severe mental illness go untreated on any given day. there's lots of reasons why somebody with a severe mental illness may not be engaged in treatment. Probably the most common one we hear about as NAMI members is stigma. Because the news media, a lot of people are ashamed to seek support. Hopefully, we think that things are getting better in that area, but it still is one of the leading causes for people not to seek treatment. There's also inadequate community support. A lot of communities vary from one county to the next in terms of the quality of treatment that's available. There's still health insurance gaps despite all of our work over the years trying to gain parity for mental health and insurance. We still run into issues there. Certainly distance is an issue, particularly people who live in rural areas or lack of transportation. Substance abuse can often interfere with access to treatment. Side effects of medication is another big one. I know I have an adult son with mental illness, and he was a teen. He was on Clozaril, ended up gaining probably 100 pounds while he was on the medication. And as soon as he turned 18, you can bet that was the last time he's ever taken medication. So it really does affect how people think about taking medications. Challenges with executive functioning. I have a girlfriend who has schizophrenia, and she's constantly forgetting to take her medication. They've since put her on an injection, which has really helped a lot, but for many years she struggled with that. It wasn't because she didn't want to take it, she simply could never remember. Mistrust of doctors is another issue. If you've ever been involuntarily picked up and brought into a hospital and maybe forced to take medication, that can certainly explain why people may have a mistrust of doctors. And this last group, this is the one we're going to focus on primarily today, folks with anosognosia. These are folks who lack insight into their illness. So it's not that they're in denial of the fact that they have a mental illness. They simply don't believe that they're ill. If you can actually see on a brain scan, it shows up for somebody with low self-reflection. You can see here in the slide here, the slide on the left side shows somebody who has low self-reflection compared to somebody, they're asked a question about their illness, and you can see on the right side where the brain is, synapses are firing, where they're not on the left side. It's literally a physical manifestation in your brain. So for these folks, they simply don't believe they're ill, so they don't follow through with treatment. Just like you and I, if we were told we had an illness that we didn't believe we had, we wouldn't take medication for it. It's no different than that. It's estimated that about 32% of people with serious mental illness who don't engage in treatment, it's because of this lack of insight. I think the Treatment Advocacy Center thinks it's probably closer to about 50% of that population have some degree of anosognosia. So these are the people, if you're familiar with this, the movie Field of Dreams, these are the folks who could have the best system in the world. You could have, plenty of funding, quality services, the transportation, maybe not an issue. These are folks who still will not avail themselves of treatment. So there are a series of consequences for folks with this serious mental illness that don't engage in treatment. We often hear that folks with mental illness are far more likely to be victims of crime than a perpetrator. Oftentimes they get caught up in the revolving door of hospitalization. They're in and out over and over because they get stabilized in the hospital. They come out, they do well for a little while, quit taking their medication, and the cycle repeats itself. Or the same thing with jail. They get caught up, picked up for some kind of nuisance crime because of their untreated mental illness. They get, go into jail. Oftentimes their situation gets compounded when they're in jail and they're not getting treatment. What turned out to be a minor offense, can become a serious offense for something that they do while in jail, and they get caught up in the criminal justice system. Also, these are folks, that we see on the streets that are homeless, that you can tell that they're really struggling with their illness and they don't have access to treatment. And then, oftentimes these are folks that either take their lives or put themselves in a situation where they end up dead. I had a good friend that I worked with on our AOT legislation in Ohio, and her son, she had brought him in to get treatment that morning. They were told, it's the story that we all know as families, they're not ill enough, come back when he's more ill. And that same afternoon, he walked to, he thought he was walking home from a friend's house and walked across the freeway and got hit by a car. So the stories that, we hear them all the time. So it's often because of this lack of engagement and treatment because of anosognosia. So this is the population for whom Laura's Law and other assisted outpatient treatment laws have been put on the books around the country. So I'm going to turn it over to Randall to talk to you a little bit about California's assisted outpatient treatment law.
Okay, so Laura's Law was actually not the first attempt to do something like Laura's Law. There was actually a bill that NAMI California was very involved in. It was called AB 1800, and it actually tried a lot of things, including assisted outpatient treatment as part of it. It tried too much, probably, including, changes in the definition of grave disability, changes to a lot of the procedures, like the medication hearings that some of you may know as Reese hearings, and on and on and on. Really big bill. It failed because it was a little bit too radical and a little bit too big at the time. So Laura's Law came back as the answer the next year, something easier to understand, an outpatient type of committal that basically uses what we now know, I think, pretty much as assisted outpatient treatment. I think that term is familiar to many of you. But what assisted outpatient treatment is, the model is at its core designed to address anosognosia. It's basically court-supervised intensive 24/7 services. And that's 24/7 services in California. In some other states, they do it a little differently, but there's a long list of services that have to be available before a county can implement an AOT program. So we'll talk a little bit about some of the other criteria in a slide coming up in a few. But, it's basically, the question was, how do we make certain that we can address the needs of people with anosognosia? And as you met, many of you probably as family members have experience, unfortunately, in your family with your loved one, interacting with and becoming involved with the criminal justice system. So the first real cut, the question here is, what is an AOT court? And it's not a criminal court, and we need to be really clear about that. It's a civil court. We don't want to criminalize folks, so there are no jail or fines if you are not, being adherent to treatment. There's no contempt of court. As a matter of fact, in the AOT statute in California, it specifically says that someone who is not necessarily cooperative with the court or their treatment team, but they are in an AOT program, cannot be held in contempt of court for that fact. So there's no terms of probation, no threat of return to jail. And, to be fair, those are all big levers. I mean, in some ways, family members often experience the dual sort of pain of having their loved one in the criminal justice system, and oh my God, that's a horrible place to treat people. But the pain is that is gone, that they're not going to get. That they're going to get treatment, and that's the unfortunate fact, is that often jail is a place where people get treatment. So why don't we use jails? Well, because they're inappropriate, and we have alternatives, and they are civil courts with judges. These kind of setups work because the judge commands a lot of authority. Couple of things, there's that black robe, there's the big courtroom, there's sitting up on a dais. Nobody can approach them. There's a bailiff with a badge and a gun. It's a pretty impressive sort of setting to be talking about a treatment program, about your treatment plan, about maybe having your providers responding and communicating to the court, and the court asking you, frankly, to pick some services that you think work for you, and then to stick with a plan to do that. So the judge is there as a friend in a lot of essences. This is where the best judges are really, really good. They can help motivate. It's not just the black robe, but they can help motivate through the personal interaction and the relationship that they develop with the individual who qualifies for assisted outpatient treatment. The other thing about court supervision is that there is this obligation on the part of the treatment team, particularly in California, for there to be regular communication with the court. And so non-adherence is something the treatment team will notice. It is communicated to the court, and the court, the treatment team, and the client or consumer can actually work together to get the person more adherent. I think I will say also that California's system was modeled on New York's Kendra's law, and Kendra's law actually has really good data that shows that the court oversight, the interjection of the court into the process of treatment, increases in accountability on the part of the treatment side. So if you know that you have a judge and the judge is watching, you tend to be pretty responsive in ways that would not ordinarily happen. So the rapid response to non-adherence, there's a couple of tools here that can make it easier for someone to get back on the wagon, if you will, to be more adherent to a treatment program, or maybe just to have more time. So the court in California originally orders a 6-month course of treatment. That can be extended if the person is struggling, and many people who enter AOT programs do find it hard, especially after many years of lack of treatment, getting used to a treatment regimen, getting used to a new team, getting used to medications and the whole thing. So that extra 6 months is really a big advantage. If the person is not adherent, the court always has the option to have the person return to court. So the court will say, let's have the treatment team bring them back in. I want to see them weekly for a while. I want to see what's going on with, the co-occurring substance use disorder treatment and medication compliance. And let's have some dialogues and conversation with the individual here in front of me in the court. The court always has the ability to order the treatment plan to be reviewed. So the treatment team would say, yeah, well, maybe we don't need X, Y, and Z, or maybe we need more intensive contact. Maybe for a while it needs to be twice a day. And in California, you're supposed to be able to have daily contact with your treatment team. But one of the other tools is that the court can order the individual, if they're resistant to even coming into the court, they can be picked up and brought into the court with a pickup order, or the alternative is if a person is in a state of deterioration, they can actually be picked up and taken to a designated facility where they can be evaluated for whether or not they meet criteria for rehospitalization. And in California, that would be under the 5150 statute, and that would be whether they were deteriorating into grave disability or danger to self or danger to others. So that's the general process. Talks about courts. Let me talk to you a little bit about the ability of Laura's law to actually sort of capture, if you will, individuals. So the first thing you need to know is that the way the law is structured, it's actually very effective. And some of these numbers in some counties are higher, they rarely go lower, but you see that they become victims so much less often. The violent behavior that they may or may not be engaged in is reduced very significantly. Contact with law enforcement is decreased very significantly. Hospitalizations decrease again, and compliance with medication, maintaining stable housing. Those are all, expectations for a great majority, as high as 85% of the people are going to experience these benefits. So here's what it takes. Here's how you qualify. This is the cut that you have to be making to be accepted into an AOT program. Of course, you have to be 18 years of age. This is not for minors. You have to have a severe mental illness, and that's defined in the law. You have to have 2 revolving door arrests or hospitalizations in the last 3 years, or threat or act of violence in the last 4, just one of those. If you meet that criteria and you're in a deteriorating condition, the law says that you have to be offered services that are the same kind of services that are the AOT services, but you gotta be given a chance to voluntarily accept those services. But if you refuse, you've just made the next step on the criteria list here, which is that someone's going to say, they're going to benefit from AOT, and AOT is really the least restrictive option. It's a whole lot better than them going back into the hospital. And we think we can keep them in the community because, remember, an AOT order is basically outpatient treatment. So they can stay in the community safely. If that's the case, then they meet all of the marks for someone to be accepted into an AOT program. So there have been some interesting developments here in this last year. Just a few short weeks ago, a bill that I worked on for the California Psychiatric Association, AB 1976, was actually signed by the governor into law. And it was very touching that in the signing ceremony, he held the bill up. He held this bill up and he had tears in his eyes, because I think it meant a lot to him, and I think it means a lot to family members and treatment professionals and treatment teams in the community. What this bill did is, instead of Laura's Law being a demonstration project and a pilot program, it is now permanent. So this provision that used to be in the law that said, basically, every 4 years, the legislature's got to reconsider whether or not to extend the program for another 4 years or so. That provision was taken out. And the other thing that this bill did, which I think is very, very important, it's the key and really the core of 1976, is that it mandated that those counties not now implementing AOT must do so. They must do so in a public process. They have to hold hearings. They have to engage stakeholders. If they decide they're not going to do it, they have to go through this process in a very public way with the stakeholder engagement and put on the record exactly why it is that they cite the facts and the circumstances which led to the conclusion not to implement it. We think that'll be a huge boon in most counties. We also allowed 2 or more counties to operate an AOT program. So if you're from a small county that doesn't have many resources, your county may join with the one next door, which may be in a similar situation. And between the 2 counties, you would have the resources to pull together an AOT program. And lastly, we corrected an oversight in the original statute, which says that judges are left out of who can refer to programs. And where do clients end up often? In criminal court. Before there is an AOT program in a county, often these individuals end up in and out of court. And that's one of the oversights we wanted to correct. If the judge is saying, I'm tired of seeing you back here, I know you got a mental illness, you need treatment, and I don't know what to do, this gives them something to do. They can make the referral. So other interesting developments in the state, the LPS report by the state auditor was put out this last summer. It was an effort that I joined in with a number of other people to get the auditor to say what's working and what's not in the LPS. And interestingly, they only studied 3 counties, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Shasta counties. The interesting thing that's good is that the auditor's report recommends that AOT go statewide. That's great. So we got lots of support there, and that's almost exactly what we did with the bill I just talked about, 1976. But the auditor's report said something really interesting. It said, let's extend the criteria in AOT so that if a person is involved in revolving door 5150s, so on a 5150, released, on a 5150, released, they have that kind of a pattern, maybe we should use AOT and adjust the criteria so it could address the needs of those kind of individuals. Same thing for conservatees. They get on the conservatorship, they stabilize, they're doing pretty good, they go off the conservatorship, and then they're back. People are wondering whether they, should be on a conservatorship again. The conservatorship is granted, that kind of thing. So the auditor, I think, did a really good job of pointing out that we're not meeting the needs of a number of people, and I just described 2 of those classes. They also said that we need more services in the community, and that's kind of a big duh. That's something we've always needed, more assertive community treatment teams, which we call full service partnerships. And then they said, we'll call it good at that point. The bad thing about the LPS auditor's report is that it said our treatment laws in the Lennerman-Petra-Short Act, where you find the 5150 statute, are working just fine, thank you, they don't need to be changed. And that's where I would have a big disagreement with the auditor. But maybe some more about that later in question and answers. So there we go, Laura's Law Development, lots and lots of stuff we just threw at you. Let me turn it over to Betsy, and Betsy can kind of take you through the next couple of slides.
Great, thank you, Randall. Just wanted to give you some practical tips if you're a family member or a NAMI advocate wanting to get more involved in AOT. As a family member, there are lots of things you can do to be supportive. Probably the most important thing is don't wait until there's a crisis. Try and learn about the AOT program in your community before there's a crisis, so you understand, one, that you have an AOT program, and if not, what you need to, we'll give you some tips for what you need to do to get one started or help to get one started. But if you do have one, you need to understand what that referral process looks like. How do you get your loved one, considered for the program? And Randall just went through some of that criteria. It's also helpful if you understand HIPAA. A lot of families, as I'm sure you probably all know this, but are often provider agencies might use HIPAA as an excuse not to give families the information they need to educate themselves about AOT. So make sure you understand the law so you can push back. If you have a loved one who does get into AOT, ask if you can. Can folks hear me?
I can now.
Okay. Oh, sorry about that. Ask if you can participate, if your loved one will allow you to participate in the treatment planning. And also notify if your loved one is starting to decompensate, notify the treatment team right away of your concern so that they can intercede early before the situation becomes a crisis. And you've got monitors that are monitoring your loved one's progress. It's not your job to do that anymore, which is, in my mind, the beauty of AOT. You can be, a parent, a sibling, a loved one without being, the you know, the doctor as well. And then you can help them celebrate. You recognize when improvements are being made and you celebrate it. You be their number one cheerleader. And you don't have to be the person that's reminding them about their appointments or about taking their medication. That now is somebody else's responsibility. If you don't have an AOT program in your community and you want to take steps to get one, the most important thing you need to do is really educate yourself about AOT. And at the end of this presentation, I'll show you where you can get some more information. But you want to engage with your local NAMI. Not all local NAMIs are supportive of AOT. So if that's the case, you might need to connect with other family members outside of the NAMI network. In some communities, it's Mental Health America that really leads the charge. So you need to find out who some of those other supporters are in your community. And be willing to share your story. You can share your story without giving out specifics about your loved one. Practice doing that. Meet with local officials, judges, leaders in your community, county commissioners, folks in the criminal justice system, your providers, of course, your NAMI folks, and find out where there's support and where there's not, and where you need to focus your energies. You can host an educational event and be sure to invite the media, have families share their story with the media. That helps a great deal in getting this issue in front of lawmakers or policymakers at the community level. Join a board. If the NAMI board is not supportive, then join the NAMI board and get on there and try and influence from within the board. Participate in candidate forums. Candidates are far more willing to go along when they're running for office than after they've been voted in. So you can get them to make commitments in town hall meetings, that sort of thing. And if you find a candidate that is supportive, be willing to volunteer your time with them on the campaign trail. Put yard signs out, walk in parades, and hand out candy, whatever that takes. And so once you do have a program in your community, there are a lot of things that NAMI can do to help support and hold that program accountable and make it better. Make sure that that your NAMI has somebody sitting at that planning table. You guys are an instrumental part of the team that makes up a NAMI team. An AOT planning team. So you need to be sure you're at the table. And carve out a role for your local NAMI. That can be, you could help convene meetings. You can, you could house the AOT monitor. You could help with the peer support services. There's a number of things that NAMI can do to help support their local AOT program. Make sure that you're including information about AOT in your educational programs. Family to Family is, they've just revamped it. I think now it's gone from 12 to 8 classes, and in class 5 now there is actually a section on AOT. So that's an opportunity to educate family members in the community about AOT. You can offer to draft documents. AOT programs usually have a participant manual and a family manual. And it's great if NAMI can take the lead on those. Certainly the Treatment Advocacy Center can offer you some samples and work with you to develop those materials. Include AOT on your state conference workshop, or you can check that box, or thank you. And another way you can really help is by recognizing people on your AOT team who are going above and beyond. If you've got a judge or some other local official, a district attorney, or a public defender, or somebody who's really going above and beyond to make your program a success, recognize them at your state and local NAMI events. Those people often are running for election. Those recognitions mean a great deal, and they will remember you when they're in office. Assisted Outpatient Treatment. You can find more information at this address that you have on your screen. The best piece that we have is a white paper on AOT implementation. It was written with experts from all over the country. We're really proud of it. It really is kind of walks you through all the elements of a quality AOT program. And then finally, we have learning modules that you're certainly welcome to. They're free of charge, and you can access them at this email address here at the bottom. So, and then finally, we recently came out with a grading the states. California did not fare well in our report card. If you're interested, we've got a grading the states report on our website that you can read. And we actually have specific recommendations for things that California can do to improve their civil commitment law. So those are all spelled out in that report. So I want to allow enough time here for questions and answers. Here are both Randall and my email address. Feel free if you have questions. If we can't get to your question during this discussion period, you're welcome to email us directly. And again, please check out our new website.
So Betsy, I see a question in the chat. I'm ready to answer that one. It asks about AOT success compared to EBT programs, and I'm not absolutely clear what EBT is, but this question comes up a lot, so I can take a stab at this. We're basically talking about an experiment one county in California conducted where there was an AOT program implemented eventually, but where they started was with an AOT program, but without any judge. So all the same services, and they're voluntary, and they worked for about a half, and they targeted the same group of people using the criteria in the AOT statute. And so the interesting result was it helped about half of the people that they did outreach to. Half of the families got their family member engaged, but the other 50% did not, their family member did not engage. And I think that's tells you that the population that has anosognosia was not having any of the voluntary services. But once you brought the judge in and online and actually developed an AOT program, then it worked for them too. In New York, I think also Kendra's law says that AOT works just a little bit better than assertive case management services, which are voluntary, so that you do have data out there in other states that do indicate that the AOT programs are pretty darn effective.
Thank you, Randall. Are there other questions? I don't see any in the chat. Let's see.
There was a supplementary question about whether or not it was the court system that made the difference between AOT services and the wrap around or intensive community treatment services. And I'll just say yes, I think that that's in fact the case.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
You bet.
My daughter's been on the street for 9 years, but she manages to stay out of big trouble. Like she's only been 5150 once, like 7 years ago. She's really very creative to stay out of trouble, but physically she's deteriorating. I definitely think she has anosognosia. So unless the law changes with regard to grave disability, I mean, I think my daughter may die on the street. There's nothing I can do, is there? I've tried everything.
You know, unfortunately,
Yeah.
that may be the case. I think there's going to be an attempt next year to change the grave disability standard in California, so stay tuned for that.
Okay, because I keep in touch with her, but she's just very creative and smart, but also thinks she's fine.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's
Unfortunately,
very sad.
all too typical.
Yeah.
But thank you for your question.
Okay.
Okay.
I have a question, if you can hear me.
Okay, Jim? Yes, we can hear you.
I'm
Is that
wondering,
you, Jim?
yes, it is. So my understanding is voluntary medication is possible under Laura's law in New York. Is that true? And is there any possibility we can hopefully get that feature expanded to California?
That was actually a LPS auditor's recommendation, is that we look at ways in which to beef up the medication mechanism in the Laura's Law statute. So that will be something we look at again next year. I think that will be considered by the legislature.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I have another question since no one else is asking. So with Laura's Law, it's 2 hospitalizations in the past 3 years, but yet the auditor said there should be a way to address the revolving 5150s. Just by the fact that you have 2 hospitalizations in the past 3 years, doesn't that address the revolving door of 5150s? I'm missing something.
The auditor was looking specifically at people who had 5 or more 5150s within a very short period of time. I don't remember the duration there, but saying that those individuals were not being funneled into AOT programs, and they should, and that it would take a change in the criteria to do that. And so, again, I think that's on the table next year.
But why does it take a change in the criteria? Because all you need is 2 hospitalizations in the past 3 years. It seems like it meets criteria already.
You know, I think for some of these individuals, you might need a criteria that sounds something like they're because of their history, they're in the process of deterioration, but they're at risk of deterioration instead of active deterioration, so that you can get those individuals a little bit earlier and avoid the 5150s. So it's a subtle difference, but it does allow earlier intervention.
Okay.
Randall, there's a question you might be familiar with dealing with Medi-Cal. So if somebody doesn't qualify for Medi-Cal and they're brought in on a 5150, counties are charging individuals presumably that don't have insurance.
Yeah, the issue there is that Medi-Cal only actually pays for the first 24 hours anyway. And then after that, it's all on the county dime. And so there's a disincentive to put people in the hospital. Medi-Cal is really not the huge factor there, except that you're precluded by the IMD exclusion from using Medi-Cal dollars for those hospitalizations after the first 24 hours. So, counties do keep really tight reins on their purse, and so that is the issue, not so much Medi-Cal.
Okay, and we have another related question. It says, and I don't really understand it, why do hospitalizations, I don't understand. Tori, I don't know if you might want to ask that question. You can speak up. I'm not sure I'm following the.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's see, why does hospitalizations only be 5150 not voluntary? So if you ask this question in our chat, please clarify in the chat so we can better answer the question. Thank you so much. And we have about 3 more minutes for our question and answer session. If anybody wants to continue to put your questions in the chat box, anything that we don't get to on this session, we can always reach back out after the session. So please go ahead and continue asking your questions in the chat box.
MHSA can fund the services part. That's an answer to one of those questions. People are usually not charged money, although that's the clarification we were looking for that I think I answered. If they have private insurance, that's an arrangement that's very difficult to work out to pay for these kinds of things. And if the person is not in a criminal justice system, how do you request AOT? They have to be deteriorating, and you have to be like a family member or a roommate, treatment professional can make a referral. You pick up the phone, the county has a line, you say you need to investigate that person, then that obliges the county to do the investigation to see whether the individual might meet criteria.
Any more questions? We have about 1 more minute. Well, thank you all so much for being with us today. You have our email addresses. We will make this slide deck available so you can access any of the information that you saw here.